let's look at social media. And social media is obviously a growing trend of reporting and getting news out there. And sometimes we're actually forced to be playing catch up as members of media, because a story can come out and it can be in seconds all over the world. And first of all, let me come to you, William, in terms of how we can ensure that we capture this news and also not twist it but make it accurate, because with social media the risk sometimes is that it can go overboard one way, depending on what the story is.
Social media is a very good platform because you'll be able to get information out there cheaply, faster, to a very big audience. But concerns have been raised, because you find that where social media, the news is very spontaneous, is very fast, it can be a sword that can also kill you, both ways. If used legitimately, correctly, there are many worthy causes which have been carried out successfully through social media. We remember the issue about Jadudi. Kenyans came out and money was collected and he was able to go for a transplant in India. That was one example where social media can be harnessed in a very positive way. This same social media can destroy lives. Lives have been destroyed because when something negative is posted out there, there's a risk of emotional, psychological torture. But if media establishment choose now, because most of the media establishments have gone digital, if they choose to harness this technology in positive ways, bearing in mind, because at the end of the day, the Constitution, Article 34 and 35, requires that as much as you are reporting, you should also be sensitive to the rights and privacy of other persons. So it's a very thin line. It's a very fine balance which needs to be struck.
Daktari, let's take even examples of, for instance, over the weekend we had two stories that were mainly trending on social media, and as a result we picked them up as a media to follow up. One of them is President Uhuru in Kenya. That was one of the things trending, and of course Magufuli, which now was even tweeting worldwide. And how we take up those stories and now follow them up.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I think that social media, the social media phenomenon has really changed how traditional mass media platforms are operating. If anything, in my view, social media has energized traditional mass media. In this sense, when stories break on social media, and a lot of people are following and a lot of people are talking, you see first in all that is happening on social media, you see the diversity of voices. And this has always been a traditional challenge for established mass media platforms like the newspaper, the radio, and whatever. Just harnessing those so many voices to come together and talk about a particular issue, I think has been prohibitive because of the traditional challenges that we know about, access and all that. But social media provides a space where people then begin to express themselves extremely, very freely, extremely independently, and to talk about issues that are emerging, including, for instance, the two stories that you have pointed to. And in essence, and by doing that, they sort of like pressure or put pressure on traditional media spaces like the newspapers to begin to attend to those emerging issues, even if they were going to ignore them. Because we know that in our setup, in our context, we still have problems about media independence. We still have big concerns and big challenges regarding editorial independence in our traditional media, particularly so given the pressures that come from authorities, elite political forces within society, but also economic and commercial questions. But when these stories break out in social media, they are left with little choice but to take up those particular issues and begin to discuss them in certain ways. So I think for me, that's a positive. But also generally, you're seeing the trend even within the region and even this country. Even government is beginning to see the potential of social media and using that as an alternative space through which they can actually reach out to particular sections of this country. in terms of promoting their own policy priorities and other political agendas that they might have. You're also seeing social media being used by political interests to fight battles. You see, for instance, if government wants to fight political opponents or those who are opposed to its agenda, instead of formally engaging them in a duel, they would rather use their bloggers through social media to deal with those groups of people. So it's a very interesting
It's an opening space.
scenario happening.
Yeah, Mwenda, do you think social media is bound to actually force us to take shape and change even the way our traditional media operates, in the sense that social media becomes a platform for news, breaking news, and then our traditional newspapers and all that change from newspapers to context papers?
That's already happened. That's already happened. Your media house and other media houses already have Twitter handles that are just based on breaking news, and they'll give you the breaking news coming in and then. As everybody in the panel is saying, social media is good if used in the right way, but there's some contexts where it's not used in the right way. For example, if you look at the narrative arc of some of these stories, is Uhuru in Kenya, and that was all over the Twitter the last few days. One aspect that all the stories lacked is what you mentioned, context. We said he travels a lot, but most people do not realize that almost half of his travel is within East Africa, and almost 80% of his travel is within Africa. So 20% of the travel is outside of the African region. Issues such as those, social media cannot comprehend as well as a traditional media house would. Also, we have just false narratives completely, you know.
Social media.
Yeah, where they say something that's completely false, and they attribute figures to things that don't even exist. And because there's nobody to tell them to fact check, because an individual, you don't challenge. And what happens is a rumor becomes a fact. And once that damage is done, it cannot be taken back. So we need to be a bit careful about who we collect information from. Also, there's the issue of the reality of social media, people like Kenyans on Twitter, and the majority of Kenyans. Let's not forget, the majority of Kenyans don't even have access to the internet.
Right.
So as much as social media is making noise, how much change can they actually implement? Politicians can easily ignore social media and still go to that person in the rural area and get the agenda across.
Hold a baraza or something.
Yeah, and you always see it on social media how they complain about how politicians are doing this, because they appreciate the fact that they don't have to listen to them. They can actually ignore them and move to other sectors of the society and get their point across.
Okay, William, in terms of, let's just take one particular story, and this would be Uhuru trips. And one of the things that was coming out in social media, and I think the traditional media picked that up, and I just want to weigh how fair that is comparing Uhuru Kenyatta's trips so far to being 43 and those of Kibaki to being 33.
Yes.
Is that fair, given that we are painting a certain picture to the public, and given that possibly we have not put it against the benefits that these 43 trips have brought, and maybe weigh it with a 33?
Well, on the surface, it was a legitimate concern, because it's an issue which had come out. So making a quick comparison of maybe a quarter of President Kibaki's term, or his entire term, to President Uhuru's term, the number of trips which had been taken so far. Well, those circumstances are not the same, because you remember His Excellency, the former President Mwai Kibaki, was someone who had come out of an accident. He was indisposed most of the times. So most of his movements had to be on the advice of his doctor. And that's why you find that he was restricted. We have a young, agile president now, who is a go-getter, who is always on the move. So just as State House Communication gave out an advisory on the tangible benefits that some of those trips bring to the country, not bad. But now the issue, because this is a government which had made a stand that we are pursuing the path of being austerity measures. The concern was the number of delegations some of those trips had, because there were people, 30 people, 40 people, who will be paid for tickets, business class, who will be put in hotels. That was an issue. So I think the media did right in bringing out that issue. And I think something which we have not mentioned, during the climate talks, I think one issue that came out, particularly in social media, was the issue of Ngina
Being on the
Kenyatta,
trip.
the president, sort of being on the trip. And people are legitimately looking for answers. Was it privately funded? Was it publicly funded? What was her value on that trip?
But
Yes.
a quick point to add. Also, there is no point of reference. Who's to say that Kibaki didn't travel enough? What is the point of reference to say how many trips a president needs to do? That needs to be established, because if we are going to accuse the president of traveling too much, we need to know what is he supposed to, how much is it, how many is he supposed to do, and not base it on a previous president, because maybe he didn't travel enough. Maybe he traveled too much. We don't know. So we need to understand what
Maybe he was
is.
laid back.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, coming to you, Daktari, and still looking at comparison, because we have this tendency, especially in social media. And you know, social media has a way of taking something and giving it a humorous twist. Then we take that and almost continue with the same narrative. And let's now take the comparison between, say, for instance, John Pombe Magufuli and even Uhuru Kenyatta. Given that, again, Magufuli has been in power for, what, 3 months? We've not had time to test some of the things he's putting in place. We've not had time to tell whether it's going to have longevity. Secondly, we take what he is doing there, or let me put it this way. Social media will take and highlight that as a very good thing. Yet here in Kenya, we are saying we don't want a roadside declarations. We want a president who follows policies, who follows the constitution. Are we able to take that story and now bring it back and derail it, or rather rail it onto what it's supposed to be, as opposed to following the social media trend of just taking a joke and making it very serious?
Yeah. Both the story around President Uhuru's travels and this comparison with the new Tanzanian president, I think there's a common thread that runs across those two stories. And the common thread is really about the expectations of ordinary Kenyans, the expectations about people that they have put into positions of public leadership. That is it. There's nothing else. It is just expectations.
So the underlying...
And the basic question is this. So how do we expect our president to behave, to do things? That's the question. That question can actually be very easily answered by the president himself, but also those other Kenyans who are in positions of public responsibility. Just chapter 6 of the Constitution and several other aspects of the Constitution speak to a lot of these questions. How are you supposed to behave? How are you supposed to use public resources? Those are the questions. Those are the underlying questions.
But then,
so those questions are the ones that provide context to this story that broke on social media regarding how many trips. You see, I think that was just the trigger. But the underlying issues that actually...
That Kenyans want to know.
Yes, that Kenyans, that made Kenyans come to that particular focal point are really these concerns about expectations. We have an ideal idea of what we think our leaders should be, as opposed to perhaps what we are saying.
Okay. William,
that
is then our responsibility?
That is a conversation that now traditional mass media platforms should be engaging
Should come
in.
and take it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, let's not forget, I was talking to one of the editors of the Standard, and he told me that every president gets about 100 days of honeymoon period from the public and from the media. So Magufuli is going through his 100 days. We have another president, Buhari, who went through his 100 days. And now people are really on his case about his promise to fight terrorism. Because he said by end of year, I'll be finished with it. But it's still happening. So even this is going to happen to the Tanzanian president as well.
Okay.
Because there are some already people who are asking questions about his way of leadership. And 100 days from now, people may be saying this is too much.
All right.
Yeah.
William, just in closing, maybe the fact that maybe we should articulate, as I was saying, the underlying issue is Kenyans want to know the expectations. Shouldn't it be then our responsibility to actually say, according to your expectations, we have missed it or we have got it?
I think you've got it, according to Kenyans' expectations, because the point was looking at what is the value? What is the value that comes out? Because the president is a state officer. He is not above the law. And being that it is the Kenyan, the public taxes that keep him in that office, then he has to account for what is the value that some of these trips bring to Kenya. So I think in bringing it out, in making that comparison, you played your part.
All right. Thank you
Yeah.
very much, gentlemen. We'll have to wind it up right there.